Hello and welcome to a very blustery Tuesday morning. However, next to me now I've got the smallest Audi electric car. This is the Q4 e-tron. However, it's got a little bit of spice and we'll be talking about that as we get into the review. Now, in terms of what actually is it, well, it's built on the same platform as the ever so popular ID.4 and the Skoda Enyaq. However, it's obviously a lot more aggressive and it's got a few little extras along the way that make it that bit more premium. Now, if we're to compare it price-wise, it's about 6,000 euros more than the equivalent Enyaq. So you are definitely paying for those extras, and we'll be getting into what those are just in a moment. Now, very quickly on prices, the ordinary Q4 e-tron, that starts at about 56,000 euros. This one being the Sportback, it costs a little bit extra at about 60,000 euros. However, you do get a bigger boot somehow, and it's also a little bit more efficient. But anyway, we'll be talking about that in a moment. Enjoy some beauty shots. Yes, the starting price for the Sportback version is about 60 grand, but this one, it's spec to a touch over 70k, and the main, most noticeable thing is it's an S-line, so it comes with things like nicer seats, aluminium pedals, some more sporty bumpers along the way. It also has, I think it's 1,400 euro option, the Matrix headlights. They're really, really good, but they are expensive. Now, the S-Line comes with 20-inch alloys. I think you have to pay about 190 euro to get these diamond cut ones, and they do actually ride quite well. The side angle, well, you really start to notice it around the back. They seem to have just chopped off the end, so it kind of comes down. They've done it very cleverly where you don't actually lose much headroom, and we'll get to that when we're in there. And as I said, there's somehow a little bit more space in the boot, which we'll get into now in a second. But around the rear, you do start to see a little bit of the ID.5, where it's got that little boot spoiler, and it does look quite well, particularly with that light bar along the cross. So here's the most mind-boggling part about the Sportback version of this car. Somehow, despite cutting half the roof off, it has a bigger boot than the normal Q4 e-tron. But anyway, in here, double click the key. This being the S-Line has the power tailgate. You can spec it as an option. But in here you've got 535 litres, which is actually really, really generous. There's some charging cables, easily accessible. You can pop this open there, and there's actually, you can store them in there, and then you can probably leave this one at home because you don't really need it. The seats fold in a 60-40 split. And other than that, it's quite a basic boot, but basic in a good way, easy to use. So let's check out the rear now, because my hair is being blown everywhere. So I was about to show you the boot, the rear space, and then talk about battery sizes, range, and different powertrains. However, in true Irish fashion, it's began to rain. So instead, we're going to go for a quick drive. Now, when you get into a Q4 e-tron, I guess the biggest, most noticeable thing is that it is a fully electric car. So how does that compare to a normal car? What's it like driving an EV versus a combustion engine? The most noticeable thing is everything is instantaneous. So you put your foot down and it takes off, and that's because it's electric. So it's kind of like a light switch. The power is just always there. The next thing you'll notice is when you take your foot off the accelerator, you begin to slow down, which is a very weird sensation the first 5 or 10 times it happens, but you do get used to it. Now, what that is it's a thing called regenerative braking. And what that means is it uses the energy of the car slowing down to recoup power and then, I guess, top up your battery as such. So it's a very efficient thing. It can be switched off, but to be honest, after 2 or 3 hours driving the car, you get very, very used to it. Now, another big thing to notice about driving any EV is they tend to be quite heavy. So this weighs, depending on which version you get, around 2 ton, which is a lot. And when you start driving in and around corners, it can feel heavy. However, this actually being the S-Line, the suspension's ever so slightly stiffer, and it's actually a little bit more flat on the road than I would have expected, particularly when you're just looking at how heavy it is and how tall it is. Now, other than all these small little factors, there's not actually a whole lot different in terms of how you sit. It's a nice driving position. Obviously, you're in an SUV, so it is elevated, but I've got the seat really low, and I actually do feel like I'm in a bit of a sports car. The steering wheel gives you that sensation. I think it's got a flat bottom and a flat top. Wing mirrors are nice and big. Rear view visibility isn't excellent, just obviously being that coupe, it's the same as the ID.5 or anything else that's got like that coupe SUV style, but it is pretty normal to drive. Now, I guess one other thing that most modern cars have, but if you haven't had it before, it will seem completely new, is a huge amount of driving aids. And you're probably thinking, I can drive, I don't need this help, but you become reliant on them when you have them. So I guess my favorite of all is adaptive cruise control. So you've got cruise control in this stalk down here. And what that does is, obviously it sets your speed, but being adaptive, if the car in front slows down, so will you. And when it speeds up, you will too, until you reach your set speed. It's so handy. There's also a thing kind of built into the same piece of infrastructure that's called Audi Pre-Sense. And what that does is it will sense, let's say, a pedestrian walking across or a car slamming on the brakes, and it will first beep and then it will actually slam on the brakes for you. It's a violent experience if you've never felt anything like it before, but it's a great safety thing, and it also helps drive down the price of insurance. So it's definitely worth having. Another thing is lane departure. Now here on a mountainous road, you can't really see it, but earlier on the motorway, I noticed it very well. So basically what happens is, as you begin to maybe veer out of your lane, if you get distracted looking at a signpost or whatever it might be, it will actually first warn you and then it will correct you to make sure that you stay in your lane. Again, another feature that you do begin to rely on, but the good thing is it can all be switched off. So if you're old school, then it's okay, you'll be very happy. Now in terms of driving, so we are going to be talking about the different battery sizes, but I will quickly say the most common one of these that we'll have in Ireland will be rear wheel drive, and that's new to a lot of drivers. If you've ever owned a Volkswagen, an Audi, even a lot of other cars, they all tend to be front wheel drive. But now with these EVs, because of where the electric motor and the batteries and the way it all works, it actually means that they're rear wheel drive, which can be weird, but if you actually put it into dynamic mode, it's pretty dynamic. You put your foot down. This one's got, I think, 204 horsepower, which is more than enough. And being pushed from the rear wheels, there's something about it that is a little bit more enjoyable. It's a little bit more scary. It's somewhat frightening in some wetter conditions, but it is great. And the reality is you can leave it in comfort mode and you'll never even know, and most people will never be aware that they're driving a rear wheel drive car. Now it can also be purchased in Quattro, which is Audi's buzzword, but it's actually a great little system. And what Quattro means is it's front and rear wheel drive. But the really interesting thing about that is you actually get two motors. So it all of a sudden goes from being about 204 horsepower to 299, which means it's pretty quick as well. But it is a lot more expensive, so it's probably a bit unnecessary for the very odd time that you're going to need some traction in some snowy conditions. And actually, even better than four-wheel drive is just a good old-fashioned set of winter tires. Now, one last thing I have to point out, because you might be like me and be a complete idiot and be so confused by the regenerative braking. So I'm just going to really dumb this one down because it's ever so slightly more complicated than on other cars. It's got these paddles here, and if you hold this one on the left, it will increase it. But I found myself noticing that it wasn't really slowing down. But the truth, it all lays down here. If you pull this toggle back, you put it from D to B mode, and then that's obviously braking mode, and it works perfectly. So just a little top tip. Anyway, it looks like it's dried up enough to take a look at the rear, so let's go do that. Now, in the rear, don't worry, we won't be long here. Probably spend more time fixing my hair than anything else. So there's not actually a whole lot going on. There's no armrest, there's no charge points down here, no climate control. But what I will say is really good knee room, and despite it being that Sportback coupe look, which generally eats into headroom, it seems to not, and I think it's because it actually dips after the rear headrest. That's basically it for here. I quickly want to talk through the infotainment system in the front, and then we'll talk about batteries. So yeah, let's hop in the front. In here, it's very Audi, which is a great compliment to the Q4 e-tron. To begin with, you've got the very well-known and reputable infotainment system here. The way it works is brilliant. It's touchscreen, Apple CarPlay is wireless and it connects up in 2 seconds, super easy to navigate. You've also got the inbuilt navigation system. I haven't used it yet, but I know that it is there and I probably will play with it down the line. In terms of climate control, separate buttons. Again, love that Audi. And then here, whilst there's not a volume knob, there is this little swivel dial and it works really, really well. And actually, you get quite used to it. Steering wheel, my only bone to pick with, let's say, I think it was the Audi A6, which we reviewed about a year or two ago, was the buttons here were a little bit cheap, or they just seemed a little bit old. Now they've gone to this haptic system, and where I don't normally like that on, let's say, the Volkswagen Mark 8 Golf, because I found my hand hit off it, whatever way they've done it with the steering wheel, it works really, really well. And then there is, of course, the MMI infotainment system up here, the digital display, works really well. Nice to navigate yourself around, and just as a whole, it's really good. The S-Line seats, obviously these are part of the S-Line package, really comfortable and very supportive. But the standout feature for me is my water bottle can pop in there. It's just absolutely glorious. It's the little things. And also, I always mention this in any Volkswagen Group car, I love the adjustability of the armrest. Now I do have one last thing to mention, and it's ISOFIX points. There's 2 in the rear, but there's also 1 up here in the front. I always make sure to note that whenever a car does have it, because not that many cars can actually take 3 child seats, but the Q4 e-tron, it can. Now in terms of engines, or I suppose nowadays they're called electric motors, there's kind of 3 different options, but it does get a little bit confusing. So my biggest tip is go down to your local Audi dealer, chat to them. They'll be able to also kind of configure a car that suits your needs the best. And if you'd like to search for Audi dealers in Ireland, then hit the link up there. But in here under the bonnet, if I just open it up, also, it's actually quite similar to a conventional engine under there. Now under here, or I suppose under all of this, because it's an EV, there's 3 options. And it does get confusing because the first one is called a 35. However, it's got a 55 kilowatt hour battery. So just ignore it. But basically that one is a 55 kilowatt hour battery. It's got a range of up to 350 kilometers. It's got 170 odd horsepower and it starts at 51k. Now I can't seem to spec that on Audi's website, but it does exist in their product guide. Then moving on to probably the more realistic version, which is called the 40, but it's got a 82 kilowatt hour, I think it's 77 usable. Now that's rear wheel drive, it's got 204 horsepower, a range of over 520, I suppose 530 kilometers. It does depend on what spec. The S-Line's ever so slightly less efficient, and that starts at about 61,000 euros. Then the third option is kind of, well, it's the Quattro version. So it's called the 50, and that has got a range of about 500 kilometers and horsepower wise 299, so it's quite quick. It's got a dual motor setup. It's very much like the GTX version of the ID.5, I suppose you would say. So after spending a bit of time in the Q4 e-tron Sportback, the overall consensus is that it's actually really good. I'm personally not a massive fan of that whole kind of coupe SUV, but I've grown to like it, and the fact that you do actually get a bigger boot, it does kind of incentivize you to maybe consider it. Now there is 1 or 2 small, I suppose you would call them elephants in the room. The first is that being an Audi, it comes with lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of optional extras. I think the only 2 you'd really consider, aside from maybe the S-Line package, would be a panoramic sunroof. It's about 1,600 quid, and a heated steering wheel, which is about 260 quid. The rest of it is somewhat irrelevant. Maybe some tinted windows, that's about 500 euro, and also you can get a folding tow bar for I think 1,200 euro. That could be of interest to you. But as far as the rest of it goes, it has enough spec, to be fair. They are getting better. One thing I will give you a laugh though is if you would like dual climate control, in this car the button's here, but this function has not been purchased. Make of that what you will. Anyway, those small little niggles aside, it is really good. And to be fair, in most cars now, particularly the high-end premium German cars, you do have to do a lot of option speccing. But as a whole, I've really enjoyed driving it. I think the seating position's gorgeous, and it's just a nice car to drive in, and you do get the sense that you're in a nice, premium, well-built, reliable German car. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please make sure to subscribe, and if you'd like to search for Audis for sale, then you can hit the link up there. But that's it for me for now, so we'll see you in the next one.